Ifoma, people keep asking me why I have no child yet. I feel so much pressure. Ifoma, ever supportive, would wrap her arms around her older sister and say, "Sis, God's time is the best. Don't lose hope." Nneka tried to settle, but longing for a baby weighed heavily on her heart. Nneka and her younger sister Ifoma grew up in a humble family home in Enugu, surrounded by the laughter of neighbors and the constant buzz of old generators during power outages. In the early mornings, they helped their mother fry akara to sell in front of the house, and in the evenings, they raced each other to fetch water from the community tap. As children, the sisters shared almost everything: food, clothes, and secrets. When Nneka finished school, she married a kind and gentleman named Chidi, who worked at a local office in town. The wedding was small but joyful, with bright music and relatives dancing under canopies. Everyone admired how calm and thoughtful Chidi was. He loved Nneka so much, and everyone could see it. After 2 years of their beautiful marriage, a cloud settled over their home. Nneka had not conceived. Whispers from friends and relatives grew louder. Is it Nneka's fault or is it Chidi's? Some people tried to sound helpful but only stirred up worry. An aunt once murmured, "Go to the village dibia for herbs, maybe that will help," while a neighbor suggested different hospital tests. Nneka tried to dismiss them, focusing on their marriage. Still, she felt a knot in her chest whenever someone asked, Nneka, any news yet?" She just wondered why people wouldn't mind their business. Ifoma often visited, arms loaded with fresh vegetables from the market. She would sweep the living room or scrub the pots in the kitchen without being asked, eager to lessen her sister's burden. Sometimes in the afternoon, the two of them would share a plate of jollof rice, chatting about their childhood. But Nneka's gaze frequently drifted to the empty corner in the bedroom, where a baby cot would have stood if her prayers had been answered. When her worries became too heavy, Nneka would sit and quietly admit, "Ifoma, people keep asking me why I have no child yet. I feel so much pressure." Ifoma, ever supportive, would wrap her arms around her older sister and say, "Sis, God's time is the best. Don't lose hope." Nneka tried to settle, but longing for a baby weighed heavily on her heart. Chidi often returned home from work to find Nneka sitting quietly in the living room, staring off into space as though lost in thought. He would gently place a hand on her shoulder and ask, "Nne, are you alright?" She usually forced a small smile and said, "I'm fine, just thinking," but he knew her mind was on the child they did not have. The silence in the flat seemed louder each day, like a distant echo that reminded them of what was missing. Whenever Ifoma visited, the mood in the house shifted. Her laughter filled the corners, and she teased Chidi about little things, like the way he always arranged his shoes in a perfect line at the door. Sometimes, she carried jugs of water in and out of the kitchen, humming the latest pop song in the clear, sweet voice. Chidi noticed how that same quiet living room seemed brighter when Ifoma was around. He was grateful that she brought Nneka temporary relief from her worries. Ifoma's jokes, her stories about the noisy market, and the silly dramas she witnessed on the bus ride always pulled Nneka's attention away from her sadness. Still, Chidi felt a strange stirring whenever Ifoma laughed at one of his jokes or patted his arm, saying, "Brother Chidi, you are too funny." One afternoon, after Nneka had fallen asleep in the bedroom, Ifoma and Chidi sat in the small dining area, quietly discussing Nneka's condition. Ifoma sighed. She's trying to be strong, but the pressure is way too much. People won't let her rest. Chidi nodded, placing his elbows on the table. "I wish I could give her the peace she deserves," he muttered, glancing towards the bedroom door. It was then that Ifoma leaned forward slightly, her face filled with concern. "We will keep encouraging her. She just needs the support that she can get." In that moment, Chidi became aware of how close they were sitting. He noticed the kindness in Ifeoma's eyes, the sincerity behind her words. Without warning, a strange feeling tugged at his heart, and he quickly shifted his gaze to the floor. From that day, Ifeoma began catching him staring at her more often. Sometimes, she turned around to find Chidi watching her with an expression she couldn't decipher. She felt a flutter in her stomach, a sudden jolt of confusion and excitement. Why is my heart beating so fast? She wondered. Ifeoma told herself that she was imagining things. After all, Chidi was her sister's husband. But each time she looked up and caught his eyes, the same warm ripple stirred inside her. Neither Chidi nor Ifeoma ever spoke about the little moments lingering between them. When Nneka was awake, they all chatted normally, discussing what soup to cook the next day or what new herbal tea Nneka should try. Ifeoma told funny market stories and Chidi nodded attentively, but beneath the surface, a growing tension thrummed in the air. One hot afternoon, the entire neighborhood felt sleepy under the blazing sun. Nneka was in the kitchen packing vegetables into a bowl when her phone rang. She answered with a curious tone, only to hear her mother's voice on the other end. Their mother insisted that Nneka come to the village at once to discuss a pressing matter related to her childlessness. After a long pause, Nneka hung up, her forehead creased with worry. Chidi found her standing by the sink, staring at nothing. He asked gently, "Nni, is something wrong?" She sighed, placing the bowl of vegetables on the counter. "Mama wants me to come home immediately. She said there's a traditional solution she heard of." Chidi wrapped an arm around her shoulder, nodding for her to continue. A moment later, she added, "I cannot just send Ifeoma. Mama specifically asked for me. She said only I can handle this." Chidi let out a slow breath and said, "If you think it will help us, you should go." Nneka turned to him with tired eyes, grateful for his ever and present support. When Ifeoma arrived later that afternoon, she suggested, "Let me just come with you, sis. I can be of help." Nneka shook her head, explaining the conversation was too sensitive. "Please stay here and take care of Chidi," she insisted, her voice tinged with both seriousness and warmth. "Make sure he eats well, oh. I'll be back in a few days." Ifeoma nodded, trying to hide the tiny flicker of anticipation that rose within her. She forced a smile, assuring Nneka that all would be fine. As Nneka started packing her small travel bag, Ifeoma stood by the door, thinking about how quiet the house might feel in Nneka's absence, and wondering what that quiet might bring. Nneka left at dawn, a small bag in her hand as she waved goodbye from the front gate. Ifeoma stood in the doorway, a hollow feeling in her stomach. All day the house felt oddly still, as though waiting for something to break the silence. By evening, the air seemed heavy with unspoken thoughts. When Ifeoma prepared dinner, she kept it simple, just yam porridge with a little dried fish. Chidi appeared in the kitchen doorway, looking unsure of himself, and offered to help slice the yam. They walked quietly side by side, their arms occasionally brushing and sending tiny sparks of awareness through both of them. As night fell, the power went out, plunging the flat into darkness. Ifeoma searched for a lamp, lighting it with shaky hands. They dined in the dim glow. Each bite of food seemed louder in the hush around them. Looking to ease the tension, Ifeoma tried bringing up random topics: the rising cost of vegetables at the market, the noisy children next door. Chidi responded softly, but his eyes kept drifting towards her, as though he had something else on his mind. After dinner, they sat at the living room discussing. This was when Ifeoma noticed Chidi watching her closely, his gaze more intense than usual. He leaned forward and whispered, "Ifeoma, you bring life into this house. Nneka always looked happier when you were around." His words sent a rush of warmth through her chest, and she felt her pulse quicken. In that moment, it was as though a dam broke. Emotions they had tried to hide rose to the surface, washing away any caution. Their eyes locked and an unspoken pull drew them closer. That night, they crossed a boundary neither had intended to breach. In the darkness, they found themselves sharing the bed meant for Nneka, their guilt mingling with the hunger of something they couldn't name. When morning came, sunlight streamed through the curtains, revealing the enormity of what they had done. Ifeoma felt shame twist her stomach into knots. She thought, I must leave this house immediately. Gathering her scattered belongings, she made her way to the door, but Chidi stood there, his eyes filled with panic, pleading, Please, stay until Nneka returns, so he doesn't look suspicious. Torn between her conscience and the tangled emotions she couldn't deny, Ifeoma paused, unsure what path to take next. The days that followed felt like a dream from which Ifeoma could not wake up. She tried to keep her distance, spending most of her time in the kitchen or pretending to be busy at the backyard. Chidi would stay in the sitting room, flipping through television channels he didn't really watch. Still, every evening, their eyes met over dinner, and a silent pull drew them closer. They spoke in hushed voices about the simplest things, how the weather had become uncomfortably hot, how the yam from the market tasted sweeter this season. Yet, beneath those mundane exchanges, tension crackled. Ifeoma longed to confess her guilt and run away, but a part of her craved for the forbidden closeness she shared with Chidi. Each time she resolved, this ends tonight, she found herself drawn back like iron to a magnet. One night, after she washed the dishes, she lingered in the dark corridor, torn by uncertainty. That was when Chidi appeared behind her, gently taking the wet plate from her hands. She turned, and before she could protest, his arms wrapped around her. She whispered, We are hurting Nneka, eyes shining with tears. He pressed his forehead against hers, replying, I know, but I'm finding it hard to let go. In a haze of remorse and longing, they ended up in the same bed once more. On the third day of Nneka's absence, she called to say she needed 2 more days in the village. Ifeoma felt a twist of relief and dread all at once. So we have more time in this secret, she thought, her stomach knotting. Each morning, she walked beside Chidi, guilt gnawing at her conscience. Yet she found it difficult to resist the comfort of his presence. Finally, on the day Nneka was to return, Ifeoma packed her bags early in the morning. She avoided meeting Chidi's eyes as she folded her clothes and gathered her belongings. The moment she heard Nneka's footsteps outside, Ifeoma murmured, It's best I go home. My sis can take care of things now. Without waiting for a reply, she slipped out, her heart heavy with the shame and the memory of the night she wished she could undo. Back in her small rented room on the other side of town, Ifeoma tried her best to forget the night she had spent with Chidi. She arranged her mother's furniture, cooked meals that she barely ate, and focused on finding new jobs online. Whenever Nneka called to check on her, Ifeoma acted cheerful but always found an excuse to avoid visiting. She told herself this distance was necessary, that it would protect everyone from further hurt. Yet, each time her phone buzzed late at night, she felt a jolt of fear. Every time it turned out to be Chidi's messages, Ifeoma, I miss you, or can we talk? She tried to be firm in her replies, her hands trembling as she typed, Chidi, this must stop. But despite her words, she felt a lingering ache in her chest. She couldn't erase the memories of the closeness they had shared, and it both pained and tempted her. At home, Nneka noticed Chidi's phone lighting up at odd hours. Initially, she brushed it off, thinking it might be office work or a friend in trouble. However, one night after midnight, the phone vibrated again. Curiosity gnawed at Nneka, especially when she saw Chidi sleep so deeply beside her. Carefully, she reached for the phone, her heart pounding. She told herself it's probably nothing, but a voice in her head whispered otherwise. She squinted at the screen, scanning the messages. The words leapt out. I still remember our night. I'm so sorry about everything. Nneka's hands began to shake, cold dread creeping up her spine. She recognized the sender's name, Ify, her sister. The shock of it made her drop the phone onto the bed, tears already blurring her vision. The following morning, the air in the house was heavy with tension. Nneka barely slept after reading the messages on Chidi's phone, her mind swelling with disbelief and anger. As soon as Chidi emerged from the bedroom, rubbing his eyes and stretching, she stood in the kitchen doorway. "What is going on between you and Ifeoma?" she demanded, her voice trembling with a mix of hurt and fury. Chidi froze mid-step, his expression shifting from confusion to alarm. "Nneka, what are you talking about?" he asked cautiously, though his heart began to race. "Don't you dare lie to me," she shouted, her voice cracking. "I saw the messages. I still remember our night." "What night? What have you done with my sister?" Chidi tried to explain, his words stumbling over each other. "Nneka, it was a mistake. It happened, but it's over now. I didn't mean to hurt you, I swear." Nneka stared at him in stunned silence for a moment, her hands shaking. Then she reached for her phone, dialing Ifeoma's number with trembling hands. Ifeoma answered with a hesitant hello, but before she could say more, Nneka's voice cut through like a knife. "How could you betray me, Ifeoma? You slept with my husband." Nneka's tone was filled with raw pain, and Ifeoma's breath caught in her throat. "Sister, I'm sorry," she whispered, but the apology sounded hollow even to her own ears. "I don't want your sorry," Nneka yelled, her voice breaking. "You were supposed to be my sister, my own flesh and blood, and you went ahead behind my back to do this." She ended the call abruptly, leaving Ifeoma clutching the phone, tears streaming down her face. A week later, Ifeoma found herself feeling nauseous every morning. At first, she tried to convince herself it was just stress or mild sickness, but as the day passed, the symptoms grew harder to ignore. One afternoon, she stopped by a small pharmacy and bought a pregnancy test. Her heart raced as she locked the door of her tiny bathroom, staring at the stick in trembling hands. The result was positive. The reality of her situation crashing down on her. "What in God's name have I done?" she whispered, her hands instinctively resting on her stomach. When Chidi learned of the pregnancy, he was at loss for words. The color drained from his face as Ifeoma shared the news in shaky voice. He sat down heavily, rubbing his hands on his face. "Nneka, how will she ever forgive me now?" he muttered, more to himself than to Ifeoma. Ifeoma remained quiet, the dread of what was coming weighing heavily on her. She couldn't bring herself to tell Nneka yet, but she knew the truth wouldn't stay hidden for long. The storm was just beginning, and there was no escaping it. The tension between Nneka and Ifeoma had grown unbearable. Nneka refused to speak to Chidi beyond curt responses, and every time she thought of her sister, her heart filled with anger and betrayal. But amidst all the pain, one thought consumed her: the baby. It was a bitter irony that her husband's infidelity had produced the child she had prayed for all these years. The unfairness of it made her cry into the night. One afternoon, Nneka couldn't hold it any longer. She marched to Ifeoma's apartment, ignoring the curious stares of neighbors as she knocked furiously on the door. Ifeoma opened it, started to see her sister standing there, her face streaking with tears. "Nneka," Ifeoma said cautiously, stepping aside to let her in. "What are you doing here?" Nneka wasted no time. "Ifeoma, give me this baby," she said, her voice shaking with desperation. "You know I have tried everything. I have begged God, done all the tests, even drank those horrible herbs. Let me raise this child as mine, and I will forgive you for everything you did to me." Ifeoma froze, her heart pounding at the enormity of what Nneka was asking. "Sister, I can't do that," she whispered. "This is my baby. I won't give it away. I'm sorry." Nneka's eyes flashed with anger. Your baby, she spat, her voice rising. Do you think you deserve this child after everything you've done? You betrayed me, my husband, my home, and now you want to enjoy the child I've been praying for. Tears welled up in Ifoma's eyes, but she held her ground. I'm sorry for what happened, sis. I am truly sorry, but I can't just hand over my baby. It's not the right thing to do. Nneka's fury boiled over. Not right. She screamed. What about what you did to me? Was that right? You destroyed my marriage, Ifoma. The least you can do is let me have this child. Ify tried to reason with her, her voice trembling. I know I made a mistake. I regret it every day. But this baby is innocent. I want to take care of it myself. But Nneka wouldn't listen. Fueled by heartbreak and anger, she stormed out of the room, muttering to herself, You will regret this, Ifoma. You will see. That night, Nneka called their mother. Through tears, she explained everything, the betrayal, the pregnancy, and Ifoma's refusal to give her the child. Their mother was shocked. Chinekeme, this is what I warned you girls about, she cried. How could Ifoma do this? The following day, Nneka escalated the matter further by involving other family members. Aunties, uncles, and cousins were soon whispering about the scandals, pointing fingers at Ifoma. Some accused her of being heartless for refusing to give her sister the baby. Others said Nneka should blame her husband instead of expecting Ifoma to fix the situation. Ify found herself surrounded by judgment. Her phone wouldn't stop buzzing with calls and messages from angry relatives. Even her landlord began giving her strange looks, clearly aware of the gossip spreading through the compound. She tried to keep to herself, but the weight of the situation felt heavier with each passing day. Meanwhile, Chidi remained distant, avoiding confrontations with Nneka and refusing to intervene in the growing family drama. Nneka confronted him one evening, her voice sharp with accusation. You are just going to sit there and watch me fight this alone, aren't you? You caused this mess, Chidi. You caused this, and this should be on you. Chidi shook his head, frustration in his voice. Nneka, what do you want me to do? I've said I'm sorry. I don't know how to fix this. Fix this? Nneka repeated bitterly. The only way to fix this is for Ifoma to give me that child, but she's too selfish to even consider it. The family pressure continued to mount, and Ifoma felt increasingly cornered. Despite her guilt over the affair, she couldn't bring herself to agree to Nneka's demands. Every night, she lay awake, clutching her growing belly, wondering how things had come to this. What should have been a time of joy had turned into a nightmare of regret and shattered relationships. The family house in Enugu was tense and heavy with disapproval as relatives gathered to discuss the scandal. The air crackled with anger and judgment as every aunt, uncle, and cousin weighed in on the betrayal. Voices overlapped as accusation flew. Ifoma, how could you do this? Your sister welcomed you into her home, and this is how you now repay her. One uncle bellowed, his finger wagging at her. Ify sat, clutching her stomach as her relatives bombarded her with words that felt like daggers. She kept her head low, too ashamed to defend herself. Her mother stood in front of her, trembling with disappointment. Finally, the older woman stepped forward and slapped Ifoma hard across the face. You brought shame into this family, her mother hissed, tears streaming down her cheeks. How could you betray your own sister, your only sister at that? Ifoma clutched her face, her chest heaving with sobs. Chidi stood awkwardly in a corner, unable to meet anyone's eyes. Every now and then, someone would throw an insult his way, calling him a disgrace to manhood and to marriage. Nneka remained silent, her arms folded tightly, her face a mask of pain. She refused to look at either her husband or her sister. And days turned into weeks. Ifoma grew increasingly withdrawn. Her once bright smile had vanished, replaced by a tired, haunted expression. She avoided the market, knowing the neighbors whispered about her whenever she walked by. The weight of her guilt, the relentless family scolding, and the burden of growing belly felt suffocating. Chidi called occasionally to check on her, but she rarely picked up. "Ifeoma, I'm worried about you," he would say on the voicemail or text. "Please take care of yourself. I know this isn't easy." Her response was always the same: silence. Ify spent most nights crying herself to sleep. What kind of life will I give this child? She wondered, resting her hands on her swollen stomach. She tried to calm herself, knowing that the stress was bad for her baby. But no matter how hard she tried, the guilt and loneliness weighed heavily on her heart. Then one stormy night in her 7th month, everything changed. The rain poured heavily, drumming against the tin roof of Ifeoma's apartment. She was lying in bed clutching her stomach when a sudden sharp pain shot through her body. She gasped, sitting up in alarm. The pain came again, stronger this time. No, she whispered, panic gripping her. She tried to stand, but her legs felt weak. Her neighbor, hearing her cries, rushed to her aid. "Ifeoma, what is it? Are you in labor?" the woman asked. The neighbor flagged down a passing cab and rushed to the nearest hospital. Ifeoma winced and cried out as the pains intensified, her hands gripping her stomach tightly. "Please God, save my baby," she prayed silently, her voice breaking with fear. At the hospital, doctors and nurses worked quickly, but their expression grew grim. Hours later, Ifeoma lay on the hospital bed, weak and hollow. The doctor's voice was gentle but devastating. "I'm so sorry," he said, his eyes filled with pity. "The baby didn't make it." The words felt like a hammer shattering her heart. She stared at the ceiling, unable to cry, unable to move. Everything inside her felt numb, empty. News of the stillbirth spread quickly, and when Nneka heard, she collapsed onto the floor of her living room, overcome with emotions. Tears poured down her face as she tried to process the news. Anger still burned in her heart, but now it was mixed with an overwhelming sadness. The baby she had wanted so desperately, the child she had begged Ifeoma to give her, was gone. She buried her face in her arms and sobbed. Their mother too was shaken by the tragedy. "God, why did you have to end it like this?" she cried, pacing the house. She called Ifeoma but received no response. Chidi went to visit Ifeoma in the hospital, guilt etched deeply into his features. He stood by her bedside, unsure of what to say. Ifeoma lay there, staring blankly at the wall. "Ify," he said softly, his voice breaking, "I am so sorry." "Don't," she interrupted, "just don't." She turned her face away, tears silently rolling down her cheeks. Chidi stood there for a moment longer, then left the room, his heart heavy with regret. The loss of the baby left a gaping hole in everyone's life. Ifeoma returned home from the hospital, a shell of herself, the weight of sorrow and guilt pressing down on her. Nneka remained bitter, unable to forgive her sister or Chidi, but she couldn't bring herself to celebrate their pain either. The family, once united, was now fractured beyond repair, and in the quiet corners of their separate lives, each person grappled with the consequences of choices they could never take back. One evening, after a strained dinner, where not a single word was spoken, Chidi followed Nneka into the bedroom. He sat on the edge of the bed. "Nneka," he began softly, "I know I failed you. I destroyed everything." She interrupted him immediately, her voice hollow and distant. "There is nothing left, Chidi. You betrayed me, my trust, my love, my hope for a family. You shattered it all." He looked at her, tears forming in his eyes. "I know I don't deserve this forgiveness, but please." "But nothing," she snapped. "You and Ifeoma took everything from me, and now there is no child, no future, no us. I can't keep pretending that we can move past this. We can't." Her words were final. Chidi felt the weight of them settle on his chest like a boulder. He knew she was right. There was nothing left to salvage. The next morning, he packed his bag, leaving behind the flat they had once shared with so much love. As he closed the door for the last time, Nneka sat on the sofa, staring blankly at the wall. She didn't even say goodbye. Meanwhile, Ifuma's mother had suggested she stay with a distant aunt in another city to avoid the whispers and judgments of the neighborhood. Ifuma agreed without hesitation. She packed her few belongings in silence, her heart heavy with shame and loss. In her auntie's house, she spent days in quiet reflection, avoiding phone calls from family. She ignored Nneka's number whenever it popped up on her screen, unable to face the pain she had caused. Even their mother's gentle calls for reconciliation went unanswered. Ifuma couldn't bear to hear her mother's voice break with disappointment yet again. Their mother prayed every night for healing in their family. "God, please bring my children back together," she whispered. But her prayer seemed unanswered as days turned into weeks and weeks turned into months. For Nneka, the loss of her marriage and the daydream of motherhood left a gaping void. She focused on her work and avoided gatherings where she might have to answer questions about Chidi's absence. Friends and neighbors speculated quietly, but Nneka didn't care. Her heart had hardened, and she carried the pain like armor, shielding herself from further hurt. Chidi, on the other hand, lived with the crushing weight of regret. He rented a small room in another part of town, spent most of his days in solitude. His thoughts about Nneka, often replaying every mistake in his mind. Occasionally, he would pick up his phone to text her, but he always stopped himself, knowing no words could undo the damage he had caused. Ifuma's shame followed her like shadow. Every night she lay awake, haunted by memories of her sister's tears, the stillbirth, and the life she had destroyed. One day, while she sat with her aunt, she finally broke down. "Auntie, I ruined everything," she sobbed. "I lost my sister, my family, even my child. How do I live with this guilt?" Her aunt placed a hand on her shoulder. "Ifuma, my darling, you cannot undo the past, but you can learn from it. You made a terrible mistake, and you have paid dearly for it. Now, all you can do is seek forgiveness and try to rebuild your own life." The story of Nneka, Chidi, and Ifuma ended not with reconciliation, but with a fractured family trying to pick up the pieces of their own ways. Nneka mourned the loss of her marriage and the child she never had. Chidi wrestled with regret, left alone to confront the consequences of his action. Ifuma, broken by shame and the memories of the stillbirth, carried with her the bitter lesson of how one moment of temptation could destroy everything once held dear. Though time would soften the wounds, the scars of the betrayal remained, a reminder of the fragile bonds that hold families together and how easily they can be broken. The story teaches that betrayal, no matter how tempting or unintentional, carries devastating consequences that can shatter trust, love, and relationships beyond repair. It highlights the importance of self-control, honesty, and respecting boundaries, as one moment of weakness can lead to a lifetime of regret. Additionally, it shows that forgiveness is hard to earn and that the wounds caused by betrayal can linger, impacting not just the individuals involved, but everyone around them. Lastly, it reminds us that action driven by selfish desires often lead to loss, pain, and isolation, leaving scars that time alone cannot heal. Thank you so much for watching this fantastic story on African Stories by Tiana. Please don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell for more amazing stories. See you next time.